Hi, I'm Scott Ritzman. I serve as the Executive Director of the Nebraska Soybean Board. This year during planting was relatively dry as we had a very mild and dry winter going into planting. Other than that, we had a pretty good planting season. Farmers were able to get in the fields relatively early due to the dry conditions. And then we had a relatively good growing conditions up until about early May when we started to have our first hard freeze, which did have an impact on some of the soybean crop. So there are quite a few farmers that had to replant this year. And then we've had an abnormally year of severe weather. We've had multiple hailstorms, windstorms. There are farmers in our state that have had to plant their soybean crop and corn crop multiple times. As we've gone through the growing season now, we are still really dry in Nebraska. We are considered moderate drought conditions. We're having rains periodically throughout the state. The fortunate thing for Nebraska is we are irrigated state. We're about 50% irrigated, 50% non-irrigated. So during those times when we're really dry, farmers that have irrigation can still put water onto the crop to still get it to grow along the growing season. So this year we've seen input costs being relatively high here in Nebraska. Availability of fertilizer and some of the seeds were hard going into the planting season due to just the supply chain issues. And there is some concern in the upcoming fall that we're still gonna have supply chain issues. Another thing that we've run into is during those storms that we've had here in Nebraska, we've had a number of pivot irrigations that have flipped over and are damaged, and there is the unknown of when they might get those parts in to get those irrigators up and running here. So here in Nebraska, our prices are relatively been pretty steady. Most of the farmers will go into planting, selling some of their crop before it's in the ground, and as they're planting and seeing what the market conditions are doing, they're gonna do some more selling. And then throughout the summer months, when we're dependent on weather and those things, they'll continue to sell going into harvest season. And a lot of the farmers try to get a lot of what they're gonna grow this year sold before harvest, depending on their availability of storage on farm. We've had some grain bins that have been damaged during the storms. So there is gonna be some issues for some of those farmers who haven't sold their crop, being able to store it on farm along with their corn crop, where they're gonna have to find a place to store that or sell it at harvest time or pay elevators to store it for them. So there is a great concern about those going into harvest season. So here in Nebraska, we are 50% irrigated, as I mentioned. And so the crops that are in the dry land area are starting to see really stressed now because of the lack of moisture here in Nebraska. As I mentioned, we're in moderate drought conditions here. On the other side, those that do have irrigation have been able to put on those timely rains when they've needed to. We did have a little bit of a problem early on in this growing season. It just seemed like things were taking longer to come out of the ground because of the compaction that we had. There wasn't moisture for the previous crop to break down and decompose. So there was a little bit of a delayed of the crop coming up out of the ground. Therefore, we have seen some of the crops this year, they're about a week behind of where they normally would be just because of that late coming out of the ground because of the compaction of such a dry winter not having moisture in the ground.